Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our last panel today. And this is the right panel to have now, this time of the day, and also the right panel to have at the end of our summit. We're going to be focusing on food. Welcome to everyone. Many students have already been with us since 9 o'clock today, and I'm also happy to welcome the teachers and students of the Bundeslehranstalt Ursprung. Thank you very much for your interest in Europe, and this also relates to a topic that is important for us, food and regional food. Just one housekeeping remark. Also to all students at the end of our panel, please come to the stage because we'll be taking a photo together with the Federal Minister. Minister, could I ask you to start us off with your keynote speech now?
Geschätzter Präsident,
Chairman, Governor, students, university students, thank you very much for your invite. Agricultural policy is a very European topic because we have two policy areas that are true supranational policy areas, regional policy and agricultural policy. We tend to quite often talk about the EU budget, but the budget is shaped in a political way in Europe, and the agricultural policy is at the heart of that. Agricultural policy, food, these two areas go hand in hand, are inextricably linked. And when we talk about food, we have to first talk about agriculture and agricultural policy. And our topic for this panel is the following: is regional the new organic? It's a very exciting question that is discussed time and again. And some people think that regional is the new organic. Other people think it's not the case. Let's have a closer look. No matter how you see it, Austria is right at home in this topic. We're world leaders when it comes to producing organic and regional products, and we want to become even better. And regional food is a trend right now, also because of the crises that we're currently facing in Ukraine, but also because of the consequences of the pandemic. Because of these crises, this topic is a topic we're focusing more and more. Now let's have a look at a couple of numbers. Now, we want to strengthen our regions by appreciating regional products. This is an important guiding principle for us. And this is an approach that we stress in particular as far as food is concerned. Now, what is regionality? We had a survey, asked people, what is regionality? 39% of those surveyed think that products from close by are regional products. 29% think products from Austria, and 10% think products directly from the farmer are regional products. So, regional products are products from our home that haven't been transported very far. Now let's look at the consumers. Let's look at their reactions. What are the developments we're witnessing there as far as consumers' behavior is concerned? Well, one thing is clear. People prefer regional products. In 2020, regional products were important for 62% of consumers. And in 2013, This was the case only for 53% of consumers, 10% less. For 36% of consumers, the price is the most important criterion. In 2013, that was different. Back then, 57% of all those surveyed said that the price was the most important criterion when making a consumer decision. This is a clear trend that we're seeing here. At the same time, just looking at organic products, around 12% of retail food is produced organically. Of course, if you look at the different types of products, the amount varies. But these figures lead to one conclusion. Our approach in Austria, our approach in agricultural policy, focuses on making us the local food shop of Europe. Now, we surveyed producers recently, and one thing became quite clear. They have requirements for climate protection, and these requirements are becoming more strict and strict, but producers still want to focus on regional products. And this is why we will stick with our basic principle as far as this is concerned. Now, what are we doing politically? Let me stress 3 points. First, what are we doing in the common agricultural policy? What are we doing for labeling of origin, and what are we doing for diversification and innovation? Let me talk about the common agricultural policy, the CAP first. Supranational area. We've been following a very European approach ever since we exceeded the EU. We have the Environment Program. Organic production is very important for us, and the Common Agricultural Policy is the most important instrument that we have in order to focus on regionality and in order to make sure we produce high-quality products. The basis of the current Common Agricultural Policy that will become relevant next year are the so-called CAP strategy plans. That's something new that the Commission has introduced. Each member state has to present such a plan. It will focus on the next years and has to take into account the so-called Green Deal of the European Commission. Just to remind you, by 2050, Europe wants to become climate neutral, and the so-called farm to fork strategy also has to be taken into account in those plans. It's a 10-year strategy that the Commission has launched. The objective: making food production in Europe fairer, healthier, and more environmentally friendly. And part of the strategy also focuses on embedding regional food system in the overall system, and the member states have to devote at least 25% of their arable land to organic production. The strategy also focuses on other aspects that I'm not going to talk about right now, but legislative acts are issued and implemented in order to implement the strategy. And Austria is already ahead of the pact. Currently, 26% of our arable land is already devoted to organic production, so we already have achieved that goal. Now, regional and organic production go hand in hand. This is something that we can see very clearly from this, and this is already part of the answer we're looking here today. Currently, I already said it, 26% of our land is devoted to organic production, 12% of all products in retailers, 12% of retail products are organic production. Of course, it depends on what products you're looking at. We have more organic dairy products than organic meat products, for example. So we have to make sure we balance that out. But of course, competitiveness plays an important role for the different types of products. This explains why we have more organic dairy products than organic meat products. Now, we want to produce more organic products. According to a government program, we want to produce 30% of all products organically by 2030. We want to also draw up a new organic action program from 2023 to 2030. And we have to act in conformity with the markets. We're not following an ideological approach. No, we want to make sure this is realistic for our markets. We need to also make sure that we have the demand we need, because we don't want to produce things that no one wants to buy, because this will drive down prices. Now we have the new agricultural policy, the so-called agri-environment program, and this program focuses on organic production. 550 million euros will be paid to support agricultural production. Investment support will be given via this program in various areas. Let's move on to the next point, labeling and the origin of products. One thing is clear. If you want to focus on high quality products, you have to label your products accordingly. We're already doing this as far as organic products are concerned, and this was a big challenge on the European level. We had to make sure that consumers knew where the product came from, and this is a challenge on an EU level, because of course we have the single market and we have to remain competitive. So this is something where certain other member states, Italy, Finland, for example, are very active. And we already talked about this at an agricultural council. We want to introduce a mandatory origin labeling in Europe. Now, as part of the Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission wants to make a proposal next year in order to implement this idea, and this is also part of our government program where we're focusing on dairy, milk, dairy, meat and eggs. Now, what is the current situation? We need to make sure that we move on to the implementation phase. We're currently in talks with our coalition partner, which has the same interests in that regard. And the federal government has started an action plan for public procurement. The objective? Sustainable products, regional, seasonal procurement, organic share 30% by 2025 and 50% by 2030. Very ambitious goals. And our federal states are supporting us in this strategy. Let me thank Governor Schweiger, who is supporting us in this as well. We have to work with the different partners in order to implement this strategy, our public procurement agency, for example, in order to achieve those goals. In addition to that, we need to launch information initiatives. We have campaigns such as Das ist Österreich and Genussregionen. This is an initiative that we want to continue, and many are a part of this. Many food producers and food marketers. Let me move on to the third part, diversification and innovation.
Regionally and organically oriented agriculture is only possible if it receives support. And for us, this is the basis of a relatively small structure agriculture as we have in Austria, because it's about covering higher prices for organic products on the market. During COVID, we saw that direct marketing worked. We had 24% increase in organic produce market share, and we are therefore actually very optimistic and think that this trend will continue to increase as long as we support it. If we look at the figures, we'll see that almost half of the direct marketers in Austria also make half of the income that comes out of that direct marketing. And 31,000 full-time jobs are supported by this, which would otherwise not be possible, most probably. And politically, things are going well as well. Over the past few weeks, we've been able to extend support and have made it possible to have a larger margin of profit for the direct marketing, or those who practice direct marketing in agriculture in Austria. In conclusion, I can say that we will continue to produce high quality, healthy agricultural products. This is a very good basis for our country, and looking at the pupils and students out there in our audience, I have to say that we hope that we can attract some of you to agriculture. The condition for that is good education and training, and we have an excellent training facility for this in Austria, which is one of the top schools by comparison to what is offered in other countries. So the basis, as I say, is a good education. And in agriculture, let me just also add, digitalization is already being pushed very strongly. So digital farming is an issue for us here in Austria today as well. And not only that, we want agriculture to become more environmentally friendly so that we can maintain our natural resources. And we are counting on our young people to support this trend so that we hope that many of you become involved in agriculture so that food will continue to be high quality and come onto people's table fresh in this country. We need regional and national support. That's not an either or. It's something that has to happen in conjunction. We are climate friendly and fresh in Austrian agriculture. We have high quality and healthy products to offer, and it will remain that way. Thank you.
Vielen Dank,
Thank you very much to the Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to just very briefly introduce my guests up here on the panel to you, as well as our remote guest. Yesterday and the day before, we had very good tourism figures which were published here in Salzburg in our region, probably because we're so hospitable. And therefore, first of all, I'd like to welcome our German guest, Stefan Richter, Master Baker, expert in nutrition and food. I'd also like to welcome Irene Neumann-Hartberger, who's a farmer and member of the Austrian Parliament. Then Josef Schweiger, who's a State Council for Agriculture, Forestry, Water Management, and Energy and Regional Planning here in Salzburg. And then also Kurt Weinberg, who's the chairman of the board of the Austrian Hagelversicherung. Then in remote, we have with us Simone Schmiedtbauer, who's also a farmer and a member of the European Parliament, and Oliver Sitar from the Directorate-General of Agriculture Agri at the European Commission. Well, so my first question, if you want a product to be declared as organic, Mr. Richter, do you have to fulfill the same rules as anyone else in Germany or in Austria or elsewhere in the European Union? So how do you define regional origin? Well, I think the federal minister already gave us a very good introduction, which was very clear, because he said that it's important to have this very clearly visible closeness to our customers. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with legal requirements. I think it's something that goes without saying. And ideally, I would have a recognizable producer who's known in the region in question. And then a further important aspect is that I need to have an overview of the production path. And I need to be able to contact the closest producer and see if the product he produces is good in terms of quality, or whether I have to go farther and look elsewhere. So quality, you're saying, is something individual, because the producer and the consumer may have different definitions of that. Well, Ms. Neumann, what is it like for you when you're in a parliamentary committee talking about product and quality rules for agriculture products, and what does that mean for producers, and what does it mean for consumers? And now we have this trend towards regionality, and there don't seem to be any rules. So are people just going to do what they feel like doing and not keep to the rules, even if they're there? Well, that's not quite the case. I think that the definition alone of regional has to be seen from different perspectives, because, okay, organic is clearly defined, and we have guidelines, directives, which are very strictly controlled. So regional has a lot to do with psychology, I think, and with our personal feeling of what my region is, who I trust, who I have confidence in as a producer, what I look for as a consumer. So when we're talking about regionality, obviously, trust is a big factor. Well, you're a farmer yourself, so knowing you and your family environment and your farm, your business, would that establish trust for people? So you don't really need some sort of a brand name, but rather you yourself, your name would be what people put their trust in, what consumers want to see. No, I don't think you can say that really, because obviously my normal farm, if you will, which does not do organic farming, has many regulations imposed on it which have to be fulfilled, and that is done by cross-compliance and many other regulations that have to be adhered to as far as milk quality is concerned and so forth. And as a federal farmer, we are very aware of this, and we're aware that we want to be involved in a dialogue with our consumer. We want them to be able to ask us, how do you produce food on your farm? How does this, that, and the other happen? And that is something which is very important for us. And we need to be open to our consumers and involve them in our world of production and convey to them a realistic picture of what we do and help them understand how we work, because there's a lot of lack of knowledge in many places, and I think that that's important to overcome. And we want this clarity to be conveyed to our consumers, who fortunately are curious, who are interested, and once we talk to them, they can understand things differently, and communication is facilitated thereby, and that's something we're very pleased about. Well, Minister Totschnig, you are responsible for agriculture and regions, and, well, not anymore for tourism, but it's still very clearly linked, because agriculture has a lot to do with tourism. And if you go somewhere where you can have access to healthy organic food, that's a very important factor. How important is this regionality in food production in Austria? And how important is it for businesses locally, for restaurants and so forth? Well, just to clarify something, when I took over the agricultural ministry, this went hand in hand with a different distribution of portfolios, and tourism went to the economy sector, and Susanne Kraus-Winkler is now responsible there, and she's a real expert as a minister in that area. As to your question, when tourists come to Salzburg, they look for Salzburg quality at the hotels, at the restaurants, and of course they have expectations and they want the food to be produced locally. And I don't have any figures with me right now, but they're very favorable in that the values are very high and the standards we adhere to here are very high. And therefore, it's only logical that in agriculture, in our forestry, we provide products which fulfill those expectations. With the labeling of origin, we were able to take a first step in actually certifying this responsibility. And there's also, I mean, you have to imagine that there's quite a big demand to be covered there. And therefore, we've made some very important first steps to be able to do that. Thank you. Well, perhaps I can jump over to Brussels and say hello to Ms. Schmiedtbauer, member of the European Parliament. In the European Union, the organic regulations or directives are being updated continually, and not too long ago, new decisions were made in this direction. And how important is regionality in that respect? Well, first of all, I'd like to greet you from Brussels to Salzburg. It's wonderful to be able to be involved in this event because I'm one of the leaders of the Organic Action Plan, and my focus in drawing it up was precisely regionality because it is absolutely essential. And that brings me to the issue that you chose for your question, because for Brussels, this is not an either-or question, because we will need both in future, and regionality is the easiest thing to achieve when we're talking about climate and environmental protection and resources that are supposed to be protected when we work. And this is a position which is being strengthened more and more. And it's important because it also makes us more independent and more risk resistant. And that is what regionality means. And that is what was in the proposal that I put to the Agricultural Committee, which was warmly received by my colleagues there. And it is the first indication of the fact that we're going the right direction with this agricultural policy. Well, staying in Brussels and bringing Mr. Sitar into the discussion from the Directorate-General for Agriculture, Agri at the European Commission. Well, regionality is everywhere and is defined differently many times. And in agriculture, obviously, it's a very important factor when we're talking about support and subsidies. So in the agricultural area, are regional producers a relevant value, is my question to you, sir. Well, good morning to Salzburg. Good morning to you, and thank you for your invitation. I would have liked to be there in person, but unfortunately it wasn't possible because of my commitments here. I'm afraid I'm not the Director-General here. That is Wolfgang Butcher, who's also an Austrian, but I do represent the Directorate-General of Agriculture, Agri at the European Commission. What we often call short supply chains is an important factor here. And that is something that the Commission is promoting very strongly at the moment. And it's part of our strategy here at Agri, at DG Agri, those short supply chains, that is. And it's also part of our framework for rural development. And it is something that should be promoted in order to ensure that our farmers have access to the services they need. And it's very important to have this in order to be able to bring food to people's tables that is of high quality and fresh. I think when we talk about regionality, it's important to realize that our trend is very consumer friendly, and therefore this is something that we really need to welcome because it leads to more value creation in the regions and locally. And this is something that is an important goal of the Common Agricultural Policy, and that is precisely to promote value creation in rural areas and to make life more worth living there. And in conclusion, I'd also like to say, even though it's not a direct answer to your question, let me just add that I'm also of the opinion that often these things complement each other. Organic on the one hand and regional on the other hand, but also, and this is a point that the minister made, which is very important, and which is something that the Commission, of course, expects, but it's also something that has to do with international supply security. And that, again, is connected to international trade issues. And that's something we need to keep in mind. And certainly looking back on the COVID crisis, it's something that we need to remember. Thank you very much indeed. And in these challenging times, this is certainly something that we need in order to be able to look with optimism to the future. Sorry for calling you the General Director. Maybe I'm just looking to the future. Salzburg tastes good. Salzburg schmeckt is a new slogan which is supposed to support food producers and the restaurant industry in Salzburg and to make them more visible, not only for consumers, however, but for the whole industry, restaurants, hotels, and it's important to make them more aware of the importance of quality food. So I wonder how far we've gotten after a year of Salzburg schmeckt. Well, it was in the spring of 2019 before the crisis really hit us, and not because we had to, because simply because we based ourselves on facts. With organic farming, we're already covering over 58% of the territory and 50% of the farming here in Salzburg, and that makes us top organic producers in Austria and in the EU. I mean, your question was certainly a very good one because organic is an important label today, and you have to keep it in mind when you're asking questions. Before 2019, we had a survey in which we asked, what do we define as regional here in Salzburg? And we realized that people were thinking very narrowly. They might go up to Upper Austria, and I was glad when they did that. And it almost went up to the region of Tyrol as well. And that was more or less it. And it didn't even go as far as our cultural friend Bavaria, which I was actually very surprised at. And a certificate of origin apparently meant to people that if that certificate says Salzburg, then that's also what's in the package. And we tried it again later on, or we tried it once before, much earlier, around the beginning of the millennium, but the time wasn't ripe back then. But now things have changed, and that is something we're very pleased about. And in the meantime, everyone knows Salzburg. Salzburg is known to tourists all over the world. And our situation now is the following. In the meantime, we have about 2,000 products and about 300 businesses, even bakeries that are part of this network of organic labeling. And we have 25 large kitchens as well. And actually 28 in the meantime. Thank you, Minister. And in these large kitchens, we feed 25,000 people per day. And here we're talking about nursing homes, retirement homes, schools, and so forth. And compared to that, of course, the restaurants are perhaps even in minority, but that doesn't mean they're not important. They are our ambassadors, because in a while people will start to ask restaurants, why didn't you have this? Why did you have this label? And therefore the resistance from restaurants can be understood on the one hand, but on the other hand, actually not, because we're not only doing it for tourists, we're doing it for the people who live here, who are at home here, and who need this orientation, and who realize that just a few years ago, we didn't know how dependent we were. And if we give up our food sovereignty, then we are giving up the sovereignty of this region. And it's very important for farmers to be on board, and they really are, because they know that they need credibility. And you can see this in the big increase in direct marketing in a place not too far to the south of here. In a small district, we have 90% farming as a second source of income. And way back when it was impossible to get subsidies for this, I used to be in the authorities that granted them. It was almost impossible to found a dairy farm when it was small back then. And this went as far as having to go to court on the basis of competition laws against large dairy farms. But in the meantime, fortunately, things have changed, and this is only possible based on good marketing strategies. The Green Agriculture Minister Künast in Germany once had a very brave idea and tried to work with 20%, but you cannot work with quotas and rules only in agriculture. You have to work with the market. That's what this experiment proved. So that's one thing. The other thing is a vertical, the vertical distinction that you have by the regions, by way of the regions, and organic. The organic labeling is a horizontal division. I remember that in the past, that we now have 80% regional and 50% organic in our large kitchens. And we had to change this because 80% regional as a quota was just too difficult, because we had the 50% organic quota for the big kitchens. So that has now been reduced to 40. So now we have 80 regional and 40 organic. And that allows us to do away with certain projects that we don't necessarily need to import from, say, Spain, because we have them here in our region as well. And that is something that you have to do based on the situation that you have before you, without disrupting the markets. Thank you very much. Well, the students and pupils seem to be very enthusiastic about the good food that they're being offered. And they're the ones who gave us the most applause just now. Well, Mr. Weinberger, your insurance company, Hagelversicherung, is one that we hear from mostly in the news when there's been bad weather, including hailstorms here in Austria. So I wonder how you see this from your point of view in the private insurance market, because obviously you have to do forecasts, and I wonder how difficult it's going to be for agriculture with respect to climate change. Well, our federal minister, Mr. Salzburger, has also made intelligent remarks on this, and perhaps I can thank him at this point for putting together this high-level panel here in Salzburg. I think it's really something that you couldn't pay for even if you wanted to. And the fact that Mr. Schausberger gave us this opportunity, I think, is extremely valuable. And I'm very pleased that he had the strength to bring together the regions of Salzburg here. And not just the regions of Salzburg, but the regions of Europe. And I'm a very enthusiastic European, and let me just tell you that we've had a branch in Romania for a long time, and I'm very pleased that we can do that, and I'm glad there's so many young people here. But when Europe is criticized, I think that criticism damages not just Austria, but the entire continent, and therefore I'm really pleased to see this high-level event and above all, to be involved in it. It's a great honor. But just one more thing by way of introduction. Over the past year, we had some very historical moments. Ships were staying in the ports. Airplanes were no longer taking off from airports. And our border crossings were restricted. So we had much less freedom of movement of persons and goods. But what does this mean for us? And let me just point out that I'm an organic farmer as well, and my son himself has also become an organic farmer. He realized that he had to really look to take up a reasonable profession after what he saw his father do in the insurance industry. So let's say what we experienced recently is history our children and grandchildren will be talking about someday. And it was very important for our agriculture in that despite the fact that everything stood still, we were still producing food. And the agricultural sector secures 500,000 jobs just like that. And they will always be needed, is what I'm saying. And if we want to strengthen regionality, then we also have to convey that when we have more demand, if we only have 20% more domestic food produced, that will lead to turnover of 4.8 billion euros and 46,000 jobs will be created. And therefore, without agriculture, we'd be like a wagon without wheels. And that has to be seen clearly. And I'm glad that it is seen clearly politically by our federal ministries and those who head them. The fact that these people are so committed, I mean, it's easy to say that, all of a sudden we have a new regulation which actually supports domestic products. That's something you have to introduce in society as well in order to have support for it. It's not that easy for them to do. And as a risk manager, of course, I look to the future.
And of course, there are some focal points. Climate change, for instance, global warming, and we had 2 heat days in the past. Nowadays we are having 8 in the same period, and agriculture is massively impacted by that. So of course the problem is the climate change, and massively we have drought everywhere in Europe, in Hungary, historical damage, in Romania. All that you just have to understand. And the second thing, you might not be surprised, another focal point is that we have to maintain our soils. Because without soils, no food, without food, no eating, without eating, no future. And so these 2 major focal points have to be considered. Stabilization and maintenance of soils, otherwise we are highly vulnerable. Well, let's keep it at the topic of challenges. Independent of the climate change, we are in a challenging era, which for many producers and also for all of us is translated into higher energy cost, higher raw material cost. We know that, all of us, I believe. Quite often we have the best intentions, excellent intentions, promises, and sometimes you just have to discard them when it gets too difficult. It's just not possible to speak about regionality only. So, dear Minister, what do you do, what can you do in this challenging era in order to support the very agriculture? Well, for us, the primary idea, of course, is to have security of supply with food. Last year in autumn, we saw how inflation climbed slowly and much more than what we had ever seen before due to COVID. In the beginning, 5%. Then there was Ukraine. The attack by the Russian Federation, this accelerated it even. Today we are at 10.5% of inflation in food, even 13 to 14, and particularly input, meaning fuels, energy and so on, raw materials, we have felt it, we have been impacted so much. More higher prices for feed, for fuels, for fertilizers, for everything. So for production this is detrimental, and of course there is support by the federal government. For instance, no cold progression, tax-wise as it is called, and of course agriculture has to be supported because otherwise there will be a scarcity in supply, and then the price would be driven up even more and bottlenecks would be created. What has happened? We have prepared a security of supply package amounting to 110 million euro, 80% 80 million related to areas and 30 million related to animals. This will be paid out before Christmas. What has been paid out already is support for protected cultivation like greenhouses, depending very much on natural gas. They received 9 million euro end of September. As regards agri-diesel, there will be a so-called temporary support with a total volume of 30 million euro. This will come next year. In the area of energy cost, that's also very important for animal husbandry, for cooling, for irrigation. There again, we are preparing a new package amounting to 120 million euro. The last details will still have to be finalized in order to make sure that the farms have power, because without power there is no food. So it's so important that we support the sector now so that security of supply in food is up on the table. And since October the 1st, there is CO2 tax also in Austria, or it's factored into the prices, because we have almost the highest mineral oil tax in the Union. And this is important. The agriculture and forestry have to be paid back, so there is a retrocession. They will be reimbursed the higher CO2 prices, and this also means security of supply. Mr. Richter, quite concretely and related to your business, to your industry, in the very field of producing bread, which is highly energy intensive, bakeries, that is due to the furnaces also and the ovens, and due to higher raw materials. In Germany it's like in Austria, is it not? So for you, quite personally for you, is there a point of no return where you say that certain creeds, personally defined quality criteria like organic only or regional only would be discarded just in order to protect your trade at all? Yeah, I cannot exclude this. If the worst comes to the worst, we have to take decisions which are in conflict with one's personal convictions in order to grant one's survival. But apart from that, it has to be the idea to protect local and regional producers, so that this quality criterion of regionalism, meaning the value added for our products, and this is what it is, and that's why organic and regional always go together, are not dissociable. A higher price means value added, and a higher price has to be achieved on the market in order to have a sustainable approach. as a company. It would be highly risky to discard this and could only be a temporary measure. This is why I push back such an idea as far as possible, because this has to be prevented, because otherwise it would be an escape towards cheaper and far-traveled raw materials, which, by the way, certainly will also drive up prices. In my situation, it's rather different. For many years already, we have been paying higher prices than the average because we do produce regionally in direct cooperation with the farmer on site, and we negotiate differently than, for instance, a large company and their purchasing representatives. So within the value-added chain, which is quite vertical in regionalism, as Mr. Schweiger has just said, in this chain I look the people into the eyes and have to make sure common survival. And so far we have paid correct prices, and we are not so much impacted by scarce raw materials, not so much as those having bought cheap from the world market. Dear Member of Parliament, we had said that the trend towards regionalism started a few years ago already. The pandemic, as in many other areas like digitalization or education, has just accelerated this trend. So now I gather from all your statements that regionalism should be important in the future as well. What does it take in order to have sustainability which actually is supported? Is it not maybe just a trend born out of need or emergency? Is it really something sustainable?
Ja, ich denke, die Regie wird Ihnen gleich den Ton schenken.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. I believe that one thing is definitely necessary, because otherwise all these initiatives towards organic, towards regional, towards seasonal will fail. It takes the consumers on board, consumers knowing what purchasing, buying behavior they should have. As long as towards the end of the day it's always organic farming, regional aspects and so on, and as long as this is only preached, but then on the shelves in the supermarket the only purchasing decision and basis is the price, then we are back to scratch. And if we look back and see how high the proportion which a household spends on food is when compared to the income, and how low the proportion which is spent now for food is, we know that in many cases it's also a question of awareness when it comes to defending regional products. And this just doesn't exist in certain cases, so we always try to work together and sensitize consumers. And we have to find this collaboration, because otherwise the best protected origin or all ingredients mentioned or all seals of a region will not help us, or labels will not help us, if consumers just do not have this on the screen. And of course they like our products, but so much is just based on the price, or is caused because consumers just do not know or do not respect these aspects. And working upon this is certainly also one of our core topics within the institution and organization of farmers, in order to have consumers on board and in order to sharpen their awareness and their knowledge about national, regional Austrian production. This is a key aspect, I believe. Ms. Schmiedtbauer, in the EU, in Brussels and also in Strasbourg, of course, depending which week it is, they always try, of course, let's say, to come up with new rules and regulations. First within Europe, meaning that all consumers more or less have the same quality requirements, but also with a view to consumers and fair competition. We have been speaking about it already. Organic is clearly defined along all lines. Do you perceive any new attempts in favor of regionalism linked to food Will a definition be found? Will a rule be found as regards what will be a regional food stuff in the future? Well, to define regional concretely, we are not yet that far, because the difference in Europe is so massive. There are so many divergences, and we have heard it already. Austria, particularly in Europe, is known as the fine food shop, so to speak, or delicatessen, or no matter what you call it, Feinkostladen. We have not defined this standard overnight, but we have so different starting points among the member states. Since 19, I've been in the parliament, and there have been so many crises which maybe we have to overcome. Just as an aside, so to speak, there were situations we all had never expected, and now we have to work step by step. So a word of warning, what I've learned in these 3 years is that it is so important for us to work and act together in so many important aspects, and together with the customers. But I defend very much the principle of subsidiarity, and things which can be mastered by a member state alone should also reside there. The problem, though, is if Commission, not Brussels, we have to have the right wording, if Commission tries, and we had seen that in so many areas, organic as well, to have a ceiling and maybe one cap for all, this is not a good idea. And let me come back to the Councillor Schweiger. It has been excellent that you, dear colleague, have said that not everything can be governed via quota. This is what happens sometimes if Commission is overzealous in their efforts. Supply and demand have to remain well balanced in order not to destroy our prices. And an organic action plan is the best example. It doesn't help to speak about the soil only, because Commission's idea was 25% organic proportion by 2030 all over Europe. We could have said in Austria, we are leading and we just lean back. But if we know that the average in Europe is at 8.5%, and we have a small member state with Malta being at 0.5% only, then we cannot see that some other member states in today's crisis are ambitious enough as regards this commonly defined target. And this is the decisive answer. We have to create incentives. I'm very much in favor of incentives and not quota. So regional is important. We have anchored this now, and now the narrative has to start. This is what we need in order to encourage others to follow an approach which Austria has embarked on many years ago already. We have one common objective, but the perspectives we see are different. Some ways are longer, some ways are shorter. But due to the narrative, due to us telling stories, due to being so honest, also to say what does not work out, we will encourage others to follow. And then it will be clear for all what is clear for us now. Regionalism is the simplest approach of all, but as our farmer colleague has said, we have to approach the consumers, and the value added has to be translated into a fair price also for the farmers. Then we all have won. The climate has won, environment has won, and of course animal welfare as well. Thanks, Mr. Schmiedtbauer. We are in open dialogue, and we have a young man now using a microphone with a question or comment. Thank you. I have a request and a question. If this really is about us wanting to be organic, there has to be more protection of the animals. It does not help to say that you do so much, because personally I don't see much. As regards animal welfare, please do more. If there is a bad example of animal husbandry, this has to entail immediate consequences. The VGT in Austria always uncovers wrongdoings. For instance, there is Speck in a certain Tyrolean area where there is not even any production of it. So this can only be done on the basis of too much transport of animals. So here I believe there should be more collaboration, and organic should be protected much, much more, and the animals in particular. Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations, because this has not only been a question but also a very important statement. Thanks to you. Maybe I'd like to pass on the question to the federal minister and the regional councillor, because we keep hearing this, we keep reading it as well. It's the topic of animal transports and also animal husbandry. Even if it's only individual cases, but there are some wrongdoings, and this is something which is not only detrimental, but it's repetitive. So what can one do in order to prevent this, so that it never happens again, and so that the other way around, maybe consumers are sensitized to give this a closer look and understand in which situations animals have been before they then are at the butchers. If I can start as regards animal welfare in Austria, this is a very sensitive area. It is taken very seriously in Austria. According to the World Animal Protection Index, is among the forerunners. We are among the top 5 as regards animal welfare. And generally speaking, if you look into organic, there the standards are even higher. But critical areas like, for instance, in porcine, in pigs, there we had an amendment of the legislation which has entailed a major development, because from next year, for instance, as you know, the full slated stables won't be tolerated any longer. So this means also more occupational material, better climatization. For others, there are some deadlines as regards expiry. So behind Finland and Sweden, we are top in Europe. So this will mean for the Austrian producers that so much is being done, and this has to be remunerated. So we have done a lot. Or, for instance, also permanent feathering is not allowed any longer in cattle husbandry. So Austria are doing very much, but at the same time we also have to give support, of course, to the farmers, so that the sale of more expensive products can succeed. As regards sanctions, we have to look into details, because if someone, for instance, sees that there is wrongdoing, then there is an administrative penalty. And if there is an animal welfare program, it's not only a penalty but even a sanction. So this means that as regards the future, in addition, there is also a sanction in terms of direct payment. So this is quite severe a consequence which takes place in reality. So it's not just a minor offense, it does have some major consequences. And also there are some spot audits, so that one can even act preventively. And next year, if someone is new in the agri-environment or animal welfare program, automatically he has to be part of the animal health service as well. So at least once a year there is a control, which also means that we give this a very close look. The producer in Tyrol, I think I know who it is, he would not write Tyrol on it, but Austria, the AMA, AMA label. So this is not wrong, it is Austrian meat which is processed in Tyrol, so this is legitimate. So Austria, for instance, from next year in investment funding, 120 million annually will be spent on animal welfare, plus 80 million annually for measures like straw husbandry and so on. So that's the agri-environment. So 1 million in total 120 plus 80, so 200 million. No one else does as much as we do in Austria. Dear Councillor, thank you very much. Let me pass on the question and add one more topic, because if the focus is on regionalism, this is important for the consumer, and the consumers would then get to know the companies much better, would see the farms, would see the slaughtering maybe also, and maybe there would be much shorter distances in animal transport. Yes, thanks for the question. In those farms, they are of course scrutinized and accompanied precisely. We know them in all detail, but still among those 9,000 farms, there are some, maybe one, maybe two, maybe none per year, where there is issues. And we keep seeing that these are not people not liking the animals, but they just are overtasked with their situation and their family burden, for instance, or problems of most diverse sources. That's a completely different fate normally, and there we notice what's going on. So the request is, if you know about such a thing, do give it a look. The veterinary director is just not in the room, but as head of department in 2004, I gave the concrete instruction to be particularly severe as regards consequences of such cases. Why so? Because some have totally lost sight of reality, and we see enormous consequences of that in the press and also among members of animal protection organization. There is a president of the Republic in Austria who once said, "We are not like this." No, we are indeed not like this. And here also the supermarket chains, they request things which just can't be delivered by Austrian farmers. For instance, 5.90 instead of 11.90 euro for meat for schnitzel, this just can't be done. And all standards are now being increased, and particularly in pig farming and so on, they can't make both ends meet any longer. And meat is the most sensitive product in agriculture, and if there is an organic proportion of 2% only and 25% or 28% in milk, then we see where the cost actually lies. And if you say A, you have to say B as well. In the land of Salzburg, we have implemented a program where calves, if possible, are not just exported to EU countries, other countries, because we don't want that and the farmers don't want that. So if you see how much meat is consumed stemming from calves, meaning how much veal there is consumed, you have to know that it should be rosy and not white, but that can't be done. If you have a calf 7, 8, 9 weeks, then of course roughage is searched, and roughage just can't, if it can't be given to the animal, then the meat stays white, or you just do what the calf wants. You add some roughage, and then after the roughage feeding, it's 1 to 7 on the scale. But we still do that, and when we slaughter in this country, then we see that it does work. And the federal minister said it, how much money we use in order to improve conditions of animal husbandry in this country. And actually we should say that sooner or later we should have made it. It's now 27 years that we are in the union. We have spent so much money. You shouldn't criticize only, we should be grateful also, because otherwise we wouldn't have that. And in the land of Salzburg, 4.5 years ago, we launched a program. In the meantime, 19.27 million have been spent on measures, regional funds, which for the small region of Salzburg is a lot. And these animal husbandry conditions, so as to improve them, up to 60,000 euro can be granted, and 18 50,000 where the farmers can use this money. It's not always a new stable. It's minor adaptation sometimes. It's changes in the stock. You don't always have to reconstruct everything. You can also revamp. You can retrofit. And this actually is among our important intentions. But one request, if you know of something, please tell us. It's not always only VGT or X or Y. We all have mobile phones, and we also get reports and pictures which we can then follow. Today everyone has a mobile camera, so to speak, and please do tell us about the wrongdoings you discover. We would always react. I hope you have received a satisfactory reply to your question, but let's stay in this field. Dear Minister, there is the AMA quality label, for instance, and there is of course also animal welfare, and so contained therein. Consumers most often wouldn't know that. They know what an AMA Gütesiegel in Austrian is, but they do not really understand what is behind all of this. This morning I ate a fruit, or I saw a cup of fruit yogurt. 21 times the term of bio, organic, was written on the yogurt cup. Could you not just save on that and maybe just say Tierwohl, animal welfare, at least once? Because particularly young consumers, to them certain things are important. And you should also say that there should be a statement which is a separate label of its own. Well, in Austria we have the AMA Gütesiegel, but also the AMA Bio-Siegel, and this includes that it is organic standard, and this is the highest standard in terms of animal welfare. So if you see the red, white, red, round label, you know that this is the highest standard, also governed by the European organic regulation. There are some chains, of course, using their own labels and seals. That's obvious in a free market, and this is why our focus via agricultural policy is to strengthen the quality label, and this also means that you see where that comes from, and that you also see what level of animal welfare is granted. For instance, the Tierwohl Schwein, animal welfare for pigs, is a program where you say that you are 60 or 100% even higher than the legal standards. In Austria we are having 250,000 pig which are marketed via this approach. 1 million is the target for 2025, a huge challenge also with a view to inflation. So this means via the AMA quality label, animal welfare is included, and the Bio-Siegel, the organic label, is the highest standard. And for pork, for instance, we also know how that's done, and for cattle we also know exactly that milk from January 24 has also to be delivered from AMA, and this quite certainly comes then from animal husbandry without permanent tethering. So here we have a very good approach. We can use it still.
Sitar, wenn ich wieder zu Ihnen...
Mr. Sitar, coming back to Brussels, to you. On the one hand, we have the producer. The councillor said it. We wouldn't even be able to afford all of these requirements. But today, producers also have to think economically. A producer cannot just produce based on his or her own principles, but also has to take economic factors into account. And then, on the other hand, we have the consumers. Prices are rising, so consumers are seeing where they can save costs. Is it not very sobering to say, in the end, it's the price that's decisive? Now, how do you see this? We provide grants for farmers, but at the end, it's But in the end, the consumer will buy the cheapest product. How can we make sure that we can really focus on regionality? Well, I think my answer builds on two components. Firstly, and the participants of the panel have already mentioned it, we have to work together with the consumers. We need to make sure that the consumer knows that the information on the package is true. And I think this is something we will have to focus on more intensively. And then, Mr. Kretz, this is something you've mentioned, and this is very interesting. Just imagine a consumer. But it's difficult to talk about the average consumer, because we have consumers for whom animal welfare is very important. Others think that climate protection is more important. And all of these factors are important for sustainability. And the relevant information should be provided for the consumer, so the consumer can make a decision when buying a product. This actually isn't that easy. And next year the Commission will table a proposal that will also cover this area, that will also cover the different components of sustainability. And you mentioned that the word organic was printed 21 times on this yogurt, but the idea would be to create a label that covers all of these factors that factor into sustainability, in order to make sure the consumer can make an informed decision. And we're not just talking about climate protection, for example, when we're talking about sustainability, but also social cohesion. That's also important for sustainability. And this is also something that has to be considered. I think we need to raise awareness amongst consumers, and we have to try to make sure that the market can absorb those higher production costs. And we call this externalities in economic jargons. These are factors that cannot be factored into the price. And this is then, these costs cannot be passed on to the consumers then. And in this regard, we have to make sure that we can provide financial assistance out of the public purse. The idea is to make sure that we take the necessary budgetary measures. We have to support the farmers. We cannot forget the fact that we're experiencing a crisis. This will be necessary in order to guarantee food supply. So, coming back to your question once again, I would say we need to make sure that we act in a market-based manner. We have the action plan for organic products. We've tried to set the right incentives to raise awareness amongst consumers, and wherever the market cannot guarantee the livelihood of a farmer, we need to invest public money, because agriculture is a multidimensional area. We need the agricultural sector to preserve our regions as well, for example. This is important for us as a society. and I think it's completely justified to provide supporting measures. Now, back to our Member of Parliament again. You work in a legislative body. Now, if regionality means that the consumer is looking for a producer close by from the same region, does this mean that you think we should think about changing the conditions for regional producers? Maybe loosen the rules a little bit. I just remember this debate that we had in Austria about home slaughter, cooling chains. Maybe we have to rethink certain topics. Do we have to make sure that something like this becomes possible? Yes, I think we do have to lend support. But I think you have to look at to what extent, because we also need to make sure that the quality is right. We need criteria, regulations and controls in order to guarantee quality. We cannot say, well, just in order to produce regional products, you're allowed to do whatever you want to do. No, we do have to make sure that we also guarantee the right quality. Sorry, if I can just quickly intervene here. I agree with you, but if we are sitting here today, then the people in the generation before us survived as well. Maybe we did too much gold plating here. Maybe we went a little bit too far. Well, no, I'm actually talking about something else here. Because just look at animal welfare. Sometimes you have individual cases. If things go wrong, then usually it's an individual case. But usually then people call upon new rules for the entire sector. But I think this means that we've learned a lesson from the past whenever we've had a food scandal, AHAC, cucumbers, listeria in dairy companies. These aren't just individual small farms that are affected, but sometimes big holdings. And this usually then means that the entire subsector is affected, but because consumers react accordingly. Now, if for example there's a scandal relating to pork or poultry meat. Mr. Richter, question to you. We often have different names for the same products in Austria and Germany. How does that work? If you want to produce regionally and if you want to produce the same products. Sometimes we actually do use the same names for the Christstollen, for example. I have to produce bake Christstollen, this traditional Christmas cake that is also produced here in Austria. We also know this in Saxony. But I use regional flour. I use a regional spelt, and I don't use almonds, but walnuts, regional walnuts. We've had a very good harvest this year, and aronia berries, again a regional product. So this is a constant positive development, I think we can say. Regionality is a trend, to put it quite simply, but the Christstollen, this Christmas cake, was also a cake for which exotic ingredients were used. Just think of the three wise men coming from the east. So traditionally ingredients were used that weren't regional, but then we have to think along those lines and have to think of maybe reaching out to producers from a different region. Let me just give me an example. We have a cooperative for growing vanilla pods, and I use those pods for my baked goods. And these pods are grown in a sustainable manner. Let me just come back to the question from the audience. I'm pretty sure I think we can say that the consumers can also always do more than politics can. And this means that consumers really have an influence. They can really have an impact. Now, in Germany, I think we're spending 12% of our income on food. I think it's a bit more in Austria. But this is something we shouldn't underestimate. And consumers should have the option to react. Why did we see those big scandals? Well, because we have huge producers. So, as far as risk management is concerned, it's better to spread things amongst more small-scale producers. You need a balance between small-scale producers and larger producers. And I think here we really have room for improvement. Now, if a consumer, a local consumer, can buy his pork directly at the farm, then this is important. I have two logos on my jacket, regional food logos. Die Lausitz schmeckt, analog to Salzburg schmeckt, and the idea behind those logos is to adhere to even stricter rules than the law-based ones. And we have to be able to look each other in the eye on a regional level. Now, it's the butcher buying his bread from me. I know the butcher, I buy my meat from him, and we want to be able to look each other in the eye and say, I've produced my goods in the way you would want me to. And this is why it makes me very happy to hear the Commission say this is important for sustainability. But then again, I'm thinking of different labeling requirements. This is, of course, difficult for small-scale producers. Now, we don't have much time left. I have two more questions to the Federal Minister first. Minister, you also have to deal with trade agreements, with what we import, what we export. Now, we're focusing on regionality. How does that work together with trade agreements? Well, our party is a party that supports trade. We need trade in order to guarantee prosperity. We need trade with America and Asia. Without the opening of the markets, we wouldn't have the current level of prosperity. So principally, we're pro-trade. As far as agriculture is concerned, well, here we really have a very close look, because we need to look at how things are done on the spot, what the requirements are, and of course, we cannot increase standards in Europe based on farm to fork, for example, and then at the same time we can't engage in free trade with countries that don't have the same measures that cut down the rainforest, for example. So what we're saying is we need fairness in trade. And agriculture is always a component of free trade agreements. We need to make sure that the goods we import live up to the standards that we have. Let me mention Mercosur. We have a clear agreement in our government program, not possible under the current conditions. At the same time, the federal government has entered into an obligation to counter this agreement, to not support it, because we do have to make sure that our high standards are complied with. Councillor, my last question goes to you. Many students are present today. Now, how do you see the next few years as far as educating our farmers for the future? Many people who study to become farmers also work in other areas. How do you see this? Well, in Salzburg, only a few farmers give up 0.8% a year. And I think that our educational system plays an important role here. We have to make sure that the young people remain interested in working in agriculture. We have these students from Ursprung, and I'm very grateful they're here today. Now, it's not just about food security and labeling, but I'm also talking about supply security. Two parameters are important here. We need to make sure that we need as little soil and space as possible to generate our products. Now, we have an objective for that in our government program today in Salzburg. We only need 1,000 hectares a day. 10 years ago it was 7,000. But we also need young farmers. That's another component. Because if a farm is not well kept up, this is something you can immediately see. Of course, the educational system costs money. Now, we have the vocational education, and here it's the regions that are responsible. I went to a vocational educational institution in Glessheim. I went to the school in Ursprung, and then I went to a higher education institution. But I never, I focused on farming during my studies, but we never learned how food is actually produced. We cut trees, we prune trees, but I never learned how food is actually produced. And then I entered politics and learned that things actually work differently. And I think we have to do it differently. We have to make sure young people become enthusiasts about food. For all the different products. If the young people don't learn what is necessary, then we can't be surprised if the older people don't know how to do it. It's the food product that should be at the center of everything. This is what we should focus on. We shouldn't just focus on producing uniform goods. And a call to Brussels, please don't try to define regionality. It's the same as if you were to try to define what home is. To me, home is a feeling, really. So regionality shouldn't be uniformly defined. The regions need to have a say, and the people who live in the regions know what is important. In conclusion, let me say a word of thanks to all the students who are here today, the teachers, because they teach what the young people need to know for the future. This is important. This was different back then when I went to school. Today, the institutions that educate our farmers for the future are much better accepted in our society, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Ich darf mich herzlich sehr herzlich bedanken.
Thank you very much to Ms. Schmiedtbauer and Mr. Sitar. All the best to Brussels. Thank you very much to the panel members who were present today. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Councillor. And thank you to all the other panel members. And now we'll hear a few words of conclusions. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed an interesting, exciting discussion and debate, and now we have reached the end of a 3-day conference. Thank you very much to everyone who took part. 500 participants were present, especially young people from 21 countries. That's not so easy, actually, to make sure all these people could come here. Thank you very much. And I'm grateful for this. We were able to listen to experts from 17 countries. 64 participants took place in our panels. It was a lot of work to organize and to prepare this conference. Thank you very much to the participants of this panel. This was the last panel, a great conclusion to our proceedings. Thank you very much to Michael Kretz. You did a wonderful job as a moderator. You're an experienced journalist, and we knew you would do a great job. And I would also like to take this opportunity to once again thank all the other moderators who also did a wonderful job.
Ja, vielleicht
a few figures maybe. Over the course of these 3 days, 4 presidents of parliaments were present. A vice president from the European Parliament was present. 1 EU commissioner was present. We had a federal chancellor who took part. 12 ministers took part from different countries. It was an extraordinary conference. And I'm very happy because we also suffered during COVID, and we were only able to organize our conference under very different circumstances. I'm happy that we're back to normal now. It wasn't so easy to organize this conference. Let me say a word of thanks to our Secretary-General, Dr. Fritz, Mr. Seifertitz, and everyone else who made this conference possible. Thank you to all the volunteers who came from all over Europe to help out. Ever since we came into existence, 500 trainees have worked for our institute for 1 month, and many of these, even though they've taken up different jobs, many of these trainees come back each year to help out with our conference. This is certainly not something that we can take for granted. Thank you very much.
wir haben heuer
This year,